I was very surprised when I got this email from Giorgio inviting me to speak at this forum. I was like, does he know? There were these 5 days in 2005 when I believed from the bottom of my heart that this idea of social businesses was something that I had thought of. It was mine. I thought I was the first person on this planet to think about it. I was like, how does Giorgio know about it? But anyways, before I go into that story, I feel slightly guilty if I don't talk about my childhood. You know, after Jessica talked about some of the moral dilemmas that she faced as a child, I had none of that. I was only thinking about making money. I was thinking about how do I get out of college, get my first job, and start making money. You should realize, I have an older sister. My parents were professors. My father had this nice system where I got my pocket money based on my test scores. Everything I wanted in life was, you have to do something, get these marks, you know, win this competition. I was tired of that. I wanted to make money. But this is where my presentation story really begins. Today I work at Acumen, which seriously believes in wanting to change the way the world thinks about poverty. And I hope by describing the journey or the number of organizations I've worked with to get here will leave you all with a fair enough idea of how expansive this world of social businesses really are. So my first job out of college was at a technology company in India. I did my engineering in computer science, and while I was working on this large software project, I also started volunteering with orphanages. And it was during this volunteering opportunity that I really started thinking about all the social problems that probably face India as well as the world. You know, growing up, poverty did surround me, but in some ways I was very protected from it. You know, we were always thinking about get into college, get a job. And that was one experience that made me think a lot about how can I contribute to alleviating some of these challenges. And it's around the same time that I was also thinking about graduate school, and I was trying to make this decision between doing a master's in computer science or probably going to business school. And I was reading about business, and I remember this book by Peter Drucker on the practice of management. The second chapter describes what a business is, and it talks about the purpose of a business is to create a customer. Because at the end of the day, if the business is not creating something that a customer values, you really don't have a proposition. And that idea just rung so true in my head. It was like, that's it. Even when you're volunteering, when you're doing anything, you need to think about, what value are you creating? And I was heady, thought this was so cool, did some Google search, business plus NGO, there was none around, and I thought this was fabulous. I could probably dedicate my life to this. Until someone handed me a book that talked about this organization called Ashoka, which has been in existence, I think, for about 30 years now, and has been identifying social entrepreneurs around the world. And these social entrepreneurs do precisely that. They pick a social problem, and they just invest all their entrepreneurial energy in trying to tackle the social issues. I said, fine, the idea is not mine, but let me best learn by apprenticing with one of them. So I found a social entrepreneur in Chennai, which is a city down south in India, which is now called Willgrow. The entrepreneur is Paul Basel. The organization is now called Willgrow. Earlier, it used to be called Rural Innovations Network. And the organization's mission was to identify grassroots innovators. It sincerely believed that there were many innovators out there in rural India who, by virtue of just living many of their problems and challenges, had come up with solutions. And there was a possibility to identify some of these innovators, handhold them through a design process, and really take their little products, their innovation, make micro enterprises out of them, and sell these products in different parts of India. Again, the assumption being some of the challenges faced in one corner of rural India would be the same in other parts of the country. One part of our organization actually identified innovators. The other side tried to build these marketing and distribution channels that would take these products to our customers. The photograph you see is of a rural retail chain we were trying to build in one of the southern states of India in Tamil Nadu. So I spent about a year in villages, and the kind of products we worked with are, let's say, a low-cost milking machine. I don't know how many of you have ever milked a cow, but it's quite a painful process. It's not as easy as you might think. And for someone who has just 2 or 3 cattle, so they're not a big milch cattle farmer, so they can't afford an electrical machine, but they have 2, 3 cattle. every day morning, milking this it's painful. Even they have labor problems, and so trying to sell a low-cost milking machine. A paddy seeder, again, things I learned, you always hear about smallholder farmers, 1 acre, 2 acre plots, but you never imagine how these farms are really organized. So meeting a farmer would often mean you walk kilometers into different farms and wait at his little 2 acre plot for him to come to show a product. The big learning for me was rural distribution, marketing is still so new, still so challenging. I spent 2 years at this organization, and some of the big questions in my mind at the end of this period was, how effective are traditional donor-funded organizations? I don't know how many of you have experience working in nonprofits or NGOs, but you usually get their money by writing long grant applications describing how you're going to spend the money. Then you have to write these narrative reports. Slightly frustrating. Sometimes you're not sure if you're on the right path. You don't even know how accountable you are. And as someone who is still very ambitious in the sector, trying to figure everything out, how do you measure effectiveness, efficiency, I was looking for different models. And that's when I came across Acumen, where I work right now, which believes in, as I mentioned, creating a world beyond poverty by doing 3 things. Acumen wants to invest in organizations, in game-changing companies, as we call it, want to invest in leaders, and invest in ideas. And I'm going to talk about the first 2 in greater detail. So first, a little bit about Acumen's global footprint. We have offices in India, in Pakistan, in Nairobi that invest in East Africa, and in Ghana, where we work in West Africa. And we recently opened one in Latin America. So these are the geographies in which we work with companies. Now, the kind of companies we're looking for are companies that are working with low-income communities, specifically, as we call it, where markets have failed, where aid has not been effective. We talk about providing critical goods and services, and I'll talk about the sectors. And mostly, many of them are very early-stage companies. They're companies that nobody is willing to take a risk on, and that's where Acumen comes in. But Acumen still does not want to give just grants, because we believe that there is some increased level of accountability that comes in by taking in debt or taking equity or giving debt to some of these companies. And here is another interesting reason why Acumen does what it does. Is we believe that markets, in many cases, are our best listening devices, not just places to make or maximize our profit, but given the inherent dynamic that exists with traditional nonprofits, where the people who are giving money are different from the people you're going to serve, creates some sort of power imbalance, or there is a different power structure, which we wish to mitigate by actually investing in a company. And if your sales at the end of the day or your survival is dependent on serving or selling a product or a service, you start thinking or putting your end customer first. So that's very critical for what Acumen does. Again, this is a little bit about our investment criteria. There are many social businesses out there, but we're really looking for those ideas that can scale, could give, let's say, grow 10x or reach at least 1 million customers quickly. We're looking for a passionate team that's really concerned about poverty alleviation. And again, of course, it has to be self-sustaining financially, but more importantly, real game changers. We work in 6 sectors. So water and sanitation, energy, agriculture, there's low-income housing, there's healthcare, and I think I've said it all. And this is just a quick, some numbers in terms of impact. We've invested in 80 companies, overall $85 million in capital has been deployed, about 100 million lives reached, and 65,000 jobs created. Again, some specific examples. Now, D-Light that you see on the screen there is a solar company. It has reached 15 million lives across the world. ZHL, which is an ambulance company, which I'll talk about in just a bit, has reached 2 million customers, and they provide emergency medical services in India. NRSP is a bank in Pakistan that provides livestock loans. Again, a huge number, 1 million. And then Sproxil is an innovative company that started out their operations in West Africa, where counterfeit medicines is a huge problem. And especially if you belong to a low-income community, it's the chances of you buying an expensive medicine, which is counterfeit, is really high. So all you need to do is, if you buy the medicine, there's a code on it, you can SMS the code to a particular number, and they will let you know immediately if that particular strip of medicine is counterfeit or not. Again, huge impact in terms of reaching 2 million customers. Now, apart from investing in companies, Acumen also firmly believes in investing in leaders. We're talking about creation of almost a new sector. Who are these people who are going to challenge the status quo? Who are these folks who are really going to provide moral leadership in a world that increasingly looks fragile while there is so much opportunity? And it's with these dreams in mind, who are these moral leaders, as I said, that we also run leadership development programs. We have a leadership model, but mostly it's all about this. We believe that growth happens when you push people out of their comfort zone, and this is what we try to do through our programs. This is a leadership model. We have this idea of moral imagination, of how you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes to imagine what the world could be. And we always say all this vision is great, but if you don't have the skills to execute on your vision, you're really not helping anybody. And one of the programs, the first programs they had is called the Global Fellows Program, which I applied for, firmly believing in what Acumen does, and I wanted to learn more about Acumen Fund's investment model. Once I became a fellow, I got the opportunity to work with 1298, which is this company that provides emergency medical services in India. Now you need to understand, in India, there has been no provider of emergency medical services. For a population of 1.2 billion people, if unfortunately you happen to be part of an accident, the chances of you getting an emergency response is almost close to zero. And about 5 entrepreneurs, mainly motivated due to such horrible personal incidents where they needed an ambulance, they had nowhere to call, realized that they needed to do something about it, started this company. This is the world's first for-profit social enterprise that provides ambulance services. They have a very interesting model. And to make sure that the provision of services is not dependent on your ability to pay for it, they have something called the Robin Hood model, where once you call for an ambulance, based on the hospital to which you want to go. So one of the main reasons people use ambulances for patient transfer services. So if you go to a government-run hospital, you actually get a subsidized rate. If you go to a real fancy, upmarket, some of these fancy hospitals, you'll be charged the full rate. And the drivers and the staff on the ambulances are empowered enough to, if they feel that the person who has actually made the call does not have the means to even pay the subsidized rates, they can offer the service for free. All accident victims are picked up for free. And this model actually works. The surprising thing, what I learned, and I don't know if the entrepreneurs will be happy for me sharing this, is supposedly the people who go to the fancy hospitals are the ones who crib the most about the price. The people from low-income communities are so happy that there is a service that they pay. In fact, even if they're given a free service, they'll come back and try and pay in some way. It was very interesting for me to work in this company because I realized, and I was doing some market research for them, was even in India, where we call there is ambulance services, predominantly ambulances are hearses. They transport dead bodies. We don't have a class of medical professionals called paramedics. So a company such as 1298 not only has to build the infrastructure of buying ambulances, creating a call center, figuring out where to place them, but also work towards creating a class of professionals like the paramedics who they could hire. 1298, in a country where you grow up not knowing such a service is provided, how do you remember this number? I think more kids in India know about 911, thanks to Hollywood movies, than today about 1298. So companies such as this, social businesses, have to invest also in a lot of social marketing. So some of the other things that I learned. And now is when I had to shift from India and I moved to Nairobi, where through this fellowship I was asked to work at a company called Ecotact. And Ecotact is a company that builds public toilets. That is a real banner. I didn't make this up. There is a World Toilet Day. It's November 19th. You can check. And it's actually been popularized by this organization called the World Toilet Organization. As I say, in my opinion, the real WTO. Now, again, sanitation is a huge challenge. I don't know how many of you know this, but about 2.5 billion people don't have access to safe sanitation. And by that, I don't mean access to some of the toilets that you have in this space here, but just something as rudimentary as a hole in the ground with a superstructure for privacy. Many people in this world just don't have that access. And people rightly have realized that you could provide access to water and food, but if you don't have access to clean sanitation, many of the benefits of clean water and food are lost. So now you have a huge number of organizations working at this. This sounds good now, and I can speak with a lot of confidence, but when I became a fellow, you would sit in this room, you've just been selected, everyone's working in agriculture, healthcare, and then they come to me, I'm working in toilets, Exactly, people laugh, It's not a funny thing that you walk into any meeting and everybody's laughing at you. But then you get used to it. But more importantly, you get fascinated by the entrepreneurs behind this. My boss, David Correa, he would talk about, what do you mean toilets? We're in the shit management business. And then he would say, and our mission is to make sanitation sexy. They just don't go together. But once you start spending time with entrepreneurs who are crazy enough to take these challenges, you're working in low-income communities, in the cities where you're talking constantly about sanitation. When you see them, the passion with which they want to solve some of these challenges is truly inspiring. This is how one of these toilets look like. They're actually called, the vision behind it is like a toilet mall. A little bit about the business of public toilets. Most cases, and if it's again run as a nonprofit, as a business, it's very difficult to make enough money out of it if you just rely on people paying for using the toilets. And what they have done is, I don't know if you can notice, there's a small shop on the right side of, actually, it's on your right. There's a small kiosk there, which is also rented out. The original idea was you'll have somebody who's selling toiletries, but soon the entrepreneurs who rent this space were selling telephone credit, they were selling sodas, they were selling food. As people behind were like, you're selling food, it's a toilet. But it actually worked the other way around. It was suddenly all our customers, by virtue that there is food being sold right next to a toilet, realized that the toilet should be really clean if that's actually happening, which is surprising for us. Not just that, we also have shoe shine services behind the toilet. Again, you rent out the space for entrepreneurs who just want to provide shoe shine services, added revenue to the entrepreneur who sets up the toilets. And this whole model works because David Correa, again, he went to the city council of Nairobi and told them, you definitely want to provide sanitation services to the public. You don't have the capacity or the money to do it. Lease me land without any charge, without any interest for 5 to 8 years. I will put in the money, I will build the toilets, I will operate it for this period, and at the end of the period, the toilet and the land is yours. And of course, with the possibility of we managing it again. In some ways, not very innovative. Many of you might know most infrastructure projects around the world are built like this. It's the build, operate, and transfer model. And he was really entrepreneurial enough to bring this to the world of sanitation. This job, it's not all strategic, it's not all fun. Sometimes I was just sitting in these toilets collecting cash, counting money. We don't have fancy systems, so you build everything from scratch. Once you have about 34 toilets spread out around the city of Nairobi, how do you manage for pilferage? How do you make sure all the money is being deposited? So these are all business challenges that you get to start thinking about. Again, very interesting. This is, again, coming back. I did this when I was a fellow with Acumen Fund, and similarly, we have fellows who worked in agriculture in Kenya, who worked with the ambulance company back in India, other innovative social businesses around the world, and then go on to be in this sector. Some of them right now are setting up their own enterprises. Jawad Aslam, at the bottom of the screen, is building a low-cost housing program in Pakistan. You have Jocelyn, who's, I think, at the top right corner, who heads up IDEO.org. IDEO is one of the biggest design companies in the world, and making sure IDEO's design thinking is accessible to some of the most innovative social enterprises that could probably afford IDEO services. She set up IDEO.org. Now, this is what our fellows do. And I am back at Acumen thinking about how do we take this fellows program regionally in the geographies we work with. So we set up the East Africa Fellows Program, which looks at identifying leaders within East Africa. And our philosophy behind selecting leaders is much wider and bigger than our investment philosophy, which is focused on companies that provide critical goods and services. we do realize that solving big problems like poverty will take the efforts of all of us. So we need the government, we need social enterprises, we do need the private sector too. And we can't forget the small community-based organization and the traditional nonprofits and non-governmental organizations. Our hope is, how do we create a program that brings some of the thought leaders, some of the leaders in all these sectors together and train them and build their leadership capacity. We've been doing it in East Africa for 2 years. We recently launched in Pakistan, and within the next couple of months, we'll be launching in India, and by the end of this year, hopefully in West Africa. And that's what keeps me busy in my role at Acumen Fund, taking these regional fellows programs, identifying these leaders around the world who are taking up some of these big problems. I wanted to end with Acumen's manifesto. We recently had this deep reflection. We were going through this rebranding process and thought about what we stand for and why these social businesses. And kindly indulge me as I read this out. It starts by standing with the poor, listening to voices unheard and recognizing potential where others see despair. It demands investing as a means, not an end, daring to go where markets have failed and aid has fallen short. It makes capital work for us, not control us. It thrives on moral imagination, the humility to see the world as it is, the audacity to imagine as the world as it could be. It's having the ambition to learn at the edge, the wisdom to admit failure, and the courage to start again. It requires patience and kindness, resilience and grit, a hard-edged hope. It's leadership that rejects complacency, breaks through bureaucracy, and challenges corruption. Doing what's right, not what's easy. Acumen. It's a radical idea of creating hope in a cynical world, changing the way the world tackles poverty, and building a world based on dignity. Thank you.